Welcome back to Fast Market here on the TD Ameritrade Network. Let's bring in our next guest for our cash tag segment, and that's going to be Megan Brantley, Vice President of Research at LikeFolio. Welcome back to the show, Megan.
Thanks for having me, guys. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. So we're talking, it's lunchtime, so we're talking burritos, we're talking Chipotle. And I think, you know, Megan, if you take a look at this stock, it's pulled back pretty significantly post-earnings earlier in February. Is inflation starting to get to people, or is demand starting to wane for this product? What kind of data do you have here?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. Just from a macro perspective, I think it's important to kind of paint a picture of where the consumer is. And one of the top trends that we're following is food price concerns. This is something that's grown significantly year over year. And we see this translated, especially in this, fast, I wouldn't call necessarily Chipotle fast food, but kind of in this faster food component, we see these average prices of the check has increased by almost 11% year over year, but the quantity being delivered in that is actually down by about 5%. So big picture, you're paying more for less, right? And this is something that Chipotle is certainly leveraging. Its prices, I think, are about 10% higher, at least they were in this last quarter that we looked at. And we're starting to see, at least in our data, whenever we look at consumer mentions of people who are actually talking about going to Chipotle, those transactions specifically, those are dropping by about 10% year over year. So we do see some impact of perhaps Chipotle pricing out some of these lower earning consumers, and we see that demand slipping here. And so that's not a super severe decline. We've definitely seen steeper declines in Chipotle's history, but it's something to watch, because one thing we saw and one thing that the company noted is that they were starting to see some improvements in January, which was giving them some reasons to be hopeful. And we did see an uptick in January in our data as well, but we're starting to see that level up. If you look at this chart, you're looking at a 90-day moving average, so just a longer term moving average for these demand mentions. But if you were to flip this to a 30-day moving average, that demand decline would be 20% lower year over year. So we're not necessarily seeing the strength hold that Chipotle may have noted even just earlier this month on its earnings release. So I think that is kind of good cop, bad cop. That's the bad news for Chipotle in our data. But on the good side of things, when we look at consumer happiness levels, those are flat to even slightly improving on a year over year basis. So the consumers that are sticking around are extremely loyal, and they're not impacted by these price hikes that maybe some of Chipotle's lower earning consumers may be impacted by. So you do have a cohort of consumers that are still addicted to Chipotle, and they're not spooked by these price hikes, which is good for the company long term, because it helps provide that that insulation and keeps those consumers coming back. They're doing a really good job with the app of providing personalized recommendations and even promotions for consumers to keep them engaged. So I think that that's important, but we are seeing signs that just the total number of transactions, at least at our end, are continuing to slip.
Megan, this company gave a really good outlook for the first quarter in terms of foot traffic, in terms of operating margins are getting better. Like you mentioned, those higher prices. Despite the higher prices, yeah, they're seeing better numbers. The outlook for same-store sales growth was really good. So, this is a company that had a great January in terms of the price of their stock, rallying all the way up to, I've got the close on September 7th, about $1,722. So it's come down significantly with the rest of the market from early February until now. But certainly this is a name that's been able to pass on some of those higher prices to customers. That's much like Home Depot, right? Lower volume, but higher prices make their sales look better. But this is a company, like I said, they're still growing. They're still guiding for not only more traffic, but better margins on that traffic as they raise prices. And now they're talking about this new Farmisa brand that they're coming out with, some new restaurants. So it still seems to me like this is a growing company with a good future, going through a rough little patch here in the month of February.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that, near term, we are seeing just signs that some consumers are starting to be priced out, but that loyal bunch, which is that higher earning consumer, they don't seem to be spooked by these price increases, which is really good if you're Chipotle. And a lot of that has to do with the perceived quality of Chipotle's ingredients and the service that Chipotle provides. And that's why that sentiment level has not been impacted, which for us is a really nice long-term indicator when we're looking at a company. I think another interesting thing that we looked at is we wanted to see if consumers were starting to trade down even in what they were ordering. And the way that we did this is we looked at Chipotle mentions of, add-ons like guac and like queso specifically. And when we look at those comparative to the people who are ordering, so people who are talking about ordering Chipotle and talking about ordering those add-ons, those have not slipped on a year-over-year basis. Those have held consistent. So I think that speaks to Chipotle's pricing power as well, that this engaged consumer is still ordering what they want despite these increase in prices. And, it's not really impacting that total sentiment level. But as you mentioned, the expansion into Far Mesa, that's an interesting one for sure. This concept of a ghost kitchen, which is kind of how Chipotle plans to roll out this new chain, is something that was really, really popular, especially during the pandemic, which makes a lot of sense. But we've started to see that popularity wane. So these are just mentions of people who are talking about ghost kitchens. And there are a couple of different companies that we follow in our coverage universe that have some ghost kitchens operating like this. Denny's is one I can think of off the top of my head that they're still trying to figure that out. So it'll be interesting to see how Chipotle plays this, because on a macro perspective, when we look at mentions from consumers who are talking about getting food delivery, those are starting to slip year over year. Those are about 20% lower year over year. When we look at the big picture, Chipotle is doing a little bit better versus the macro trend in terms of food delivery, but we still see those consumer mentions of people who are talking about Chipotle delivery down by about 15% year over year. So better than the macro, but still declining. So we'll definitely be watching to see how this integration of this new chain goes, but that's, I think, further down the road. In the near term, we're just watching a little bit of loss of momentum and pricing out from consumers who may not be able to, afford the pricing increases of Chipotle, but that loyal consumer base still seems engaged.
Megan, they had earnings, as I mentioned earlier this month. Stock's down nearly 9% this week. Do you guys have an earnings score or some type of score that would say, hey, this might be a buying opportunity, or, is this still a stay away based on the price action here?
I wish that there was a divergence opportunity that I could bring to you guys today, but our score for Chipotle right now is actually a -1. So we think that the market has this one priced about right. We think it takes into consideration a little bit of that loss of momentum. So for this one, for now, we're sidelines, but we'll definitely be watching to see if Chipotle can continue to hold on to that core consumer, or if there starts to be, more significant degradation there.
All right, great data as always, Megan. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys. You too.
All right, that's Megan Brantley, Vice President of Research at LikeFolio, breaking down the data here.